Today we're going to talk about why Claude 2.1 and GPT-4 Turbo still can't fix the large context problem. The large context problem I've talked about before. There's a link in the description if you haven't heard of this before. But effectively, it's this idea that you can give a lot of text to these models and they'll be able to answer questions about that text. This is one of the key reasons why many people are struggling to have these models interface with books, large sections of text. When you're talking to it, sometimes it forgets what you're saying. So this is like one of those major pieces of key developments that we actually really need from these new AI models. And with GPT-4 and Claude, we really assumed that this sort of like creation of a larger context was actually going to get us through this space. But when we start to look at how these models are actually working in the real world, there's a lot to be desired. So this is a kind of test matrix that was done on a large kind of block of content. There was a fact placed in these different documents of varying size, and GPT had to figure out how to retrieve that text from that document. So looking at this diagram, the top of the document is at this top of this graph, the bottom of the document is at the bottom of this graph. And as this document gets deeper across these different lengths of context that you can see at the bottom here, as it gets deeper in from the top or up from the bottom, you can see that it starts to lose those facts. GPT isn't able to retrieve the data in that space. Looking into it further, you can see that GPT-4 is significantly better than many of these other models. However, it's still has a significant kind of drop off as it tries to remember some of the context in these large documents. So this is like the first problem, is that even though you're able to give these models more data, they aren't really actually able to retrieve facts out of it. The other factor is price. Here I've got a pricing calculator. We've put in some input tokens, output tokens for the 128K token window that OpenAI has. And if we look at it on this line here, you can see it costs $1.30 per question to ask GPT about some 128K context window. That's including the output token cost and the input token cost. So there's a price aspect here for sure. That means that if you're testing things out, if you're trying to figure out if this context is going to work for you, you're going to need to make a number of these requests. If you're building anything production ready, you're going to need to set up a test suite to be able to validate, hey, is this able to easily retrieve the data that we need it to? Doing that is going to cost you significantly more than many other queries that you could make with an LLM. So it begins to press the question, is this worth paying for, or should we set up a different system? Some system that uses documents and chunks them up the way we would with a RAG system. Another thing I find very interesting about this problem is the way that we generally structure data in schools and our institutions. When you think of presenting an information or presenting an idea, generally it follows this structure. You have an introduction, you introduce a series of points, you say what you're going to talk about. In the body of your content, you describe these topics that you've introduced. And then in the conclusion, you of course refer to what you've already mentioned. Said another way, what are you going to tell me? Tell me, and what did you tell me? This is a very like American style way of presenting information. We're taught this in school, we're taught this in communications classes. This is also sometimes called inductive reasoning, and it's how we present information. We present information like this in school, we present information like this everywhere. We try and condense the information that we're going to tell somebody into sort of a pitch, if you could think of it that way. It's a very kind of business-centric way of communicating. And in other countries like France, Spain, Germany, if you present information this way, leaders of companies will actually scoff at you. They'll wonder, how did you get to these sort of introductory statements? They want to see the work that you put into coming up with these topics. They aren't going to take these as fact, even though you may have good reasons for saying these things. So you might begin to see here that the training data and the data that we have that we actually give these models closely maps to the way that we think about information. You can see that similar to the context windows, the content that's in the body of the text is certainly significant, but it's always summarized in the conclusion. So all of the important and most relevant information for asking a question about some presentation is often found in the conclusion. Similarly, that same information is often found in the introduction. So when we look at this graph again, and we think about how these AI models are trying to find this information, you can see that they're generally looking for this conclusion. Sometimes they're looking at the beginning, trying to get some information, but this maps fairly closely to the way that we present information. And when studies looked at this further, you can also see many different models follow the same pattern. This is a very interesting sort of finding. Part of this makes me wonder if this is because a lot of English documentation is very kind of American or British in a way. Is that why we are running into this situation? Were we to train these models on a different language or with a different concept of reasoning, would we see something different out of the model? Another thought is that this might just be human. This might just be the way that humans think. But suffice it to say, these are difficult problems, and the size of the context window isn't actually the issue here. The issue is the fact that these models have no idea what's in the body of these texts. They've forgotten the data. They've skimmed the research paper, and they're only looking at the last few pages. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked this discussion and want to find out more about AI or other topics like this, you can follow us, subscribe down below. You can find our channel, Stable Discussion, at our blog. I'll include it in the show links here. And thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day.